Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Continuing our run through of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Right now we are up to the episode called ... Nor the Battle to the Strong, the fourth episode of the fifth season, aired on October 21st, 1996. Teleplay goes to Renee Echevarria. A story credit goes to Bryce Parker, directed by Kim Friedman. After diverting to the Federation Hospital on Echelon Prime, looking for an interesting story, Jake believes himself to be a coward when repeated Klingon attacks awaken him to the reality of war and force him to abandon Dr. Bashir and run for cover. We're joined by Clay. Clay, how are you?
Good. Getting back there anyway. I think our forced exile ended up working out pretty well because I don't think either of us were up for doing this for a while.
Not on an emotional level, but if people are wondering, maybe if you're listening in real time, you don't sort of catch up to this in a year later and wonder what we're talking about. We took about a 2-week break, I think. We both were sick. Clay got a little bit more sick during that time.
I
Go ahead.
Missed Christmas.
You missed Christmas. Yes.
Yeah. I made it through Christmas Eve and just into Christmas morning, and then I spent all of Christmas curled up in a ball with a stomach flu, while everybody had a roaringly good time the floor below me.
Best
it made
Christmas
me feel
ever.
Like the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
And I had a 2-month-old actually get hospitalized for 8 days in the ICU.
Oh, way to one-up me,
I
Wes.
know. That's what podcasts are all about. So while Clay was uncomfortably watching Netflix movies, I had a child near death in the ICU. And
For your information, I had no tablet to watch anything for at least half the day until I borrowed my dad's. So it was tough. Okay.
Charger was on the other side of the room. I wasn't going to get up. But now that the kid has died and passed on, we're able to continue the podcast.
Jesus Christ.
So no, he's actually doing fine. It's that gallows humor that we're going to talk about in this episode, I suppose, Clay, that has to kick things up a notch. But he was sick. He got RSV, which is terrible for infants. It's terrible for me. It's the reason I was sick for about a month prior to us taking some time off. The infant got it. He had to be hospitalized. They intubated him and everything. Pretty severe, pretty serious thing. So it was good to take some time off. He's better now. He's back. He's maybe not better, but he's certainly feeling better and sleeping through the nights. And he's at home, which is great. So thank you for all the kind words and understanding. People sent some very nice messages asking about him. He's doing well. Going to be fine. And that's about it.
Thank you for all.
Break.
Thank you for everyone also acknowledging that the stomach cramps that I had were they were not pleasant. They're very uncomfortable.
The only other bit of housekeeping we have, I know that people don't, generally one of our own pet peeves about podcasts is when you don't get right into it, but I thought I'd get this out of the way too. There's a poll on Patreon for all the patrons. I'm trying to figure out what some of the best stuff that people like from Patreon is and what things that people don't like. So I'd appreciate it if you're a patron on Patreon to go to their website, answer the poll. There's a couple questions and it shouldn't take you more than a couple minutes. And that will sort of finalize what we continue to do for 2019 on the Patreon, just because I don't want to be spinning my wheels and putting up stuff that no one really cares about. So we're going to use this as a way to figure out how to make the Patreon work for everybody else. So thank you for supporting the show on Patreon if you are there. It's very much appreciated. So I think that's everything, Clay. Do you have anything else you want to say before we get into this?
I don't think so.
No, I think that's it. We're back. I'm going to be doing a little the stats episode will come out. The podcast year in review I'm going to be doing as a video, which will be out before this one. But you guys can check that out for interesting numbers about the podcast. And 2019, here's to 2019. May it be better and brighter than 2018, which was also a success in its own way. So we're going to be talking about Nor the Battle to the Strong. We'll take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to break it down.
It doesn't look that bad.
Stepping over a Klingon. Thought he was dead. Got me right in the foot. Ah! You people better get out of here while you still can. The Klingons. There's no stopping them.
This is a phaser burn.
What are you talking about?
Just sit tight. We'll get to you as soon as we can.
It's not a phaser burn! It was a Klingon. You weren't there. You don't know what it's like. The Klingons had us pinned down. We were done for. We all knew it. Hendricks and Pajal, they got scared. They ran. They ran. And Sully got hit in the leg. And the medics pulled him off the line. And all I could think was, I wish I were him. And I took my face. Oh, God! What did I do to myself? What did I do?
All right. So, Clay, to throw this one off and over to you, I'm going to say that we've talked previously about how guest stars are a very big, important role in a series like this, in Star Trek particular, and we feel that a lot of episodes actually get elevated or sort of improved upon by great guest acting, which would be something like Duet, which Harris Yulin played a great Cardassian character in that one, really elevated the material. And we spent the podcast of Duet sort of wondering, like, well, if it wasn't Harris Yulin, what would how good would this episode actually have ended up being? I think this is the flip side of that coin. I think this is an interesting episode that is kind of undone by the amount of guest star actors that they have, and none of them do a particularly good job. So it kind of
I would take some offense to that. I'm a huge fan of Francis from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, who I always am happy to see in anything.
Who the hell does he play?
The blue guy, the bald blue guy.
Oh, okay.
He was also chubby in Teen Wolf.
Sure.
He's also the guy from Naked Gun who yells, "Hey, it's Enrico Palazzo," at the end of the movie after he sings the national anthem, or after he takes off the catcher's mask. Anyway, he's a character actor from the 80s mostly, but
showing up here on the tail end of his career.
Yes. Well, he hasn't worked, I don't think anyway, who cares? What would you prefer? Would you, because it's kind of a situation in which, like, you kind of have to have a lot of people you haven't seen before, you know?
Yes.
Would you prefer that this took place on DS9 itself?
No, I'd prefer that whatever the schism in acting quality that happened in the late 90s to modern television era came, like, I don't feel we watch shows anymore that have guest stars that you're just like, Jesus, this guy, like, is this his first time acting? Like, is this?
That's fair. Yeah, there's some stuff in this that is kind of like, whether it's the guy who shot himself in the leg or the guy that he runs into in the shell hole. Both of those guys are like, it looks like they got them from the voice actors room of like Wing Commander or something.
Right. Yeah, I think for how important the guy who shoots himself in the foot is, he's a terrible actor, and it's just I that's really my main problem, because I watched this one twice. I watched it the first time and I was like, I don't really care for this episode. Like, I appreciate what they're doing, but I don't think it's very good. I watched it again with the eyes more towards what the script was about and less about how the acting was holding things up. And I thought it improved on it. Like, once I got past the sort of weirdness of the acting and having to deal with the fact that there's a lot of guest stars and Sirach Lofton is carrying the show, like, and he does a pretty good job, but he's not the finest actor of the ensemble. It improved immeasurably for me. I thought, like, it's a very weird Star Trek episode. It's unlike anything else I think that the series has ever done. But what would you think about it?
Well, it's the first thing I thought was I wonder. Well, I guess these came out fairly close back to back. Anyway, what my thought was is it seems like the writers trying to taking another swing at what they thought they didn't do very well in the the one where they're all the ship, of course, the one where they're stuck in the ship, of course.
Yep.
Because you said that they didn't think that they got across the plight of Munez, that's his name?
Yeah. Or all of them in
injured,
general being trapped and everything like that, yeah.
Yeah. It seems like they're taking another swing at the war is hell kind of analogy that they kind of dipped their toe into there, and really, really leaning into it. And yeah, I thought it was really good. This is another one where I didn't super have high hopes going into it because of the way it started. Like, I hated the voiceover, and I still don't particularly love it, even though I see what it actually is.
You mean being his book, essentially?
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about. I think it's really cheesy, and I understand why they did it, but it's tough for me to be okay with a voiceover that is supposed to be someone recounting events that they were part of when you're also seeing events that they weren't a part of.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's just a storytelling thing that irks me.
The narrator has a sort of omnipresent viewpoint, even though the character is involved in the things, and he shouldn't know about what's going on outside of his own field of view.
Yeah. So like, if you have this voiceover that's someone recounting a story, but then you cut to something that's happening on Deep Space Nine that he's not a part of and would have no idea anything about, I feel like that's a little cheating a little bit. But I guess, that's personal preference, I guess. I just don't really like voiceovers that much, even if they end up being this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Also, because his voiceover delivery I didn't think was very good.
Yeah.
And also, it also came off as like, I mean, maybe they were doing this to trick you or something, to make it a little bit of a reveal, but it feels very much like just internal monologue, because he's doing that thing where like he's reacting to what the voiceover is saying as though he's thinking it.
Yes.
So that's why I didn't like it at first, because it just felt like it was internal monologue, and I was like, well, they never do this on this show. This feels really lame and really, really lazy. So yeah, I could have done without that. I think you could have done the same ending with Sisko reading the thing and get the same reaction without it having to explicitly be the voiceover of everything that you had seen through the whole episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was once we got into it, I thought it was really good. I feel like, I think Sirach Lofton does a pretty good job. I wonder if, I think he does. I think he's good.
He's great at running under fire. I'll give him credit for that. Yeah. He's a very good, like, crazed runner. His acting is very good. But I agree with you. I think he does this is probably the most he's ever been asked to do in an episode, and I thought he handled it pretty well, because the visitor mostly takes it out of his hands and puts it into Tony Todd's hands, and this is the most that he's ever had to do as an actor. I think he does a capable, fine job. He's better than any of the guest actors, I will say that. So there's that.
And he doesn't have to do a lot of like subtle stuff. Like, it's a lot of emotional swings and a lot of freaking out, and he actually is pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come off as, a lot of times that stuff can come off as really actory and disingenuous, and I don't really think it comes off too much like that, because he is also a young kid, so that kind of comes through, so it feels like, he's just freaking out as a kid. So I thought he was pretty good.
His worst moment, I think, is probably the gallows human, where the doctors are talking about what's the worst way to die, and he's sort of like, this is not funny, guys. I think that's a pretty bad scene in terms of like what he was trying to get across there. But other than that, I think he's pretty effective. He's good when he's running around outside. He's good with the reaction to everything. I thought that what I think is really good about the episode is that I was actually really impressed with the way that they played the hustle and bustle of the ER that he's in. Kind of like I thought that the way everything was framed and the way that everything was shot and the way that the actors are doing it, everything was really great. I was not pleased with a lot of the dialogue they were saying, which is stuff like cliche, like, we're losing him, damn it, and things like that. If they had cut that out and put more of a generic, like, doctory kind of sound, I was really impressed with how well they handled all that stuff. I thought that came across really well. And the thing that I think that the episode does really well is it separates and it makes a war story that feels divorced enough from the Star Trek universe where it almost feels like they're resetting things. Like, I don't think the Klingons have ever felt scarier than this, and you don't really see them. You know what I mean? Like, they get away with the sort of cheesiness of the makeup and the way that they talk to each other in the series and stuff like that by just having them be under attack by these guys and them talking about how the Klingons are going to kill the wounded, they'll kill the doctors, they'll kill everyone that comes in. And it all feels very true, but it also this doesn't feel anything like Star Trek combat to this point. Like, this is a much more realistic sort of tense and sort of horrific look at what's going on. And this is the first time I think we've ever seen Starfleet ground troopers who are getting killed.
Yeah.
And it's just stuff like that. It's interesting. The surgery meets in the foxhole is, I think he's overplaying it by about 50%, but like that's a kind of attitude that I've never really seen before from someone in Star Trek who's under fire.
Oh, definitely. Well, I mean, was it the ship where we talked about how it feels like the first time that they've actually had blood on the show?
Yeah. Yep.
Real blood
that matters. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So to
Munez
see
is
like a
bleeding.
whole, sick bay is usually filled with people who are like just asleep looking.
Yes.
Or,
clean in bed. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of burns, not a lot of blood. The ER scenes, it's funny you say the thing about the dialogue sounding so, kitschy and over the top. It's kind of, if you watch movies or shows where they actually get real ER people to do those scenes, it's more unnerving because they do talk so calmly. Like, I think RoboCop is, I believe the scene where they bring in Alex Murphy after he's been shot and they're working on him. I believe everybody in that scene is a real ER doctor.
Yep.
And so you're watching them go through the paces, and they're just very calmly talking about what's going on. It's like, well, he's bleeding out. We need to cut this thing. We need to tie this thing off. Give me 10 more blah, blah, blah of this, and then, we'll call it. And then it doesn't happen. It's like, all right, time of death, 6:15. All right, that's it. And it's just like, holy shit.
Yes. A little, it's not as, it's not doctors pounding on the chest saying, live, damn it, live.
Yeah. Well, even in like MASH, I remember the movie MASH. It's a lot of just, hanging out and talking very calmly while you're doing really intense shit.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. The emotional edge would wear off after a while, especially here. I guess because here it's a little different because they are not on the front line of a war that they're supposed to be on. Like this is a kind of a sneak attack by the Klingons. So everyone's caught a little bit unaware of what's going on. And I think that the doctor scenes are really good. And I think it's actually a pretty good Bashir episode. It shows you both sides of Bashir, which is in the opening where Bashir is sort of happy to be having an article written about him. And he's sort of bragging about his writing and the stuff that the other doctors don't agree with his take and how above it all he is. And then he settles into a nice role, which is opposite of Jake. It's a foil to Jake, where Bashir is a true professional under fire in what's going on. Like he's the one who's sort of telling everyone what to do. He's in Starfleet. He knows how this is all going to work. He's the one who does the stereotypical Starfleet heroic thing where he gets hit by like arterial shell and he gets up and picks up the generator and carries it back by himself. So, Jake doesn't do any of that, but Bashir is the one who does these like superhuman acts of will. And he is the one that sees it all through. And I really like the ending because it's such subtle stuff that you don't see in Star Trek. They show Bashir reading Jake's story, but he doesn't say anything about it. You just tell everything from his facial expression at the very end. And
I don't remember that scene. But they show Bashir reading it or Sisko reading it?
Yeah, it's right before Sisko and Jake are reading together. There's a scene of the camera pans around Bashir and he's reading the data pad as the voiceover is being read.
Oh, I see. Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah. So it's a nice little touch, and it's a good way to sort of subtly show the end. Where, as opposed to the Sisko scene, which is the Star Trek ending, where they're going to state everything, the Bashir thing is a nice little subtle hint at it.
Yeah, I thought he plays surprisingly smaller role, like because you would think given the setup of the episode, this would be like a profile and courage of Dr. Bashir, but that's the intent of it.
Surgery Under Fire, as Jake says, is the title before he gets down there. Yeah.
But it ends up being something completely different. I think it's probably better served for that because you get to see, like you're saying, you actually learn a lot about Bashir and his capabilities peripherally, and probably more interestingly than you would if they had just followed him around. Yeah. And I'm so happy that Jake didn't there's no sexy nurse he falls in love with or something. They always do that stuff in these stories where it's like there's the one nurse who's like covered in blood but still looks good.
Yes.
And she's
not a hair out of place.
Yeah, and they're kind of like talking to each other and he's like, she's like, well, why don't you help me pick that body? Like that kind of stuff. I hate that stuff. I shouldn't say I hate it. Sometimes it works. It works in Band of Brothers. It was good in Band of Brothers, but I don't think it would be out of place here.
It would fit Jake Sisko's character, I think, but they decided not to go with it. They focus instead on, it's also a little bit of a hint towards his career as a writer here, where he approaches it with a the sort of view of a novelist, and he wants to get the story that he can write the big story about. It's an homage to Hemingway and Farewell to Arms and everything. But what they do with it is that and this is going to be a thing going forward, they turn it into more of a journalism angle on it. And one of the guest characters actually talks to him about that, says, "Are you a journalist?" And he says, "No, I'm a novelist." But they will turn Jake in a little bit of a journalistic angle, and this is the way that they're going to kind of do that and sort of turn him into a war reporter. He's good here. I think everything works. It's kind of an interesting episode, and because rarely do the characters do such a development swap. Maybe it's because we don't see a lot of Jake Sisko that they're able to do this, but he goes in with a totally different attitude than he comes out with, which happens sometimes, but it doesn't, because a lot of the characters, you're so ingrained with what they believe and like how they act and everything. It's more subtle than that. Jake being only 18 and being a rarely used character helps it feel natural and realistic. Like his change towards the end here actually feels like it would be possible through this single event for him to have changed so much.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. He, they never gave Wesley anything like this to do.
No.
They never took him seriously enough as a character to, well, maybe they did a little bit, but not this seriously. And he
would have stopped the war. Well, a Wesley episode would have solved the shootout or whatever.
Yeah. And I wonder
exactly the opposite. Yeah.
I wonder if it's because they kind of have more of a, I don't want to say long-term idea, but like they seem to have an idea of, excuse me, the kind of person Jake is going to become. So I wonder if that allows them to kind of move him down that road a little clearer than with Wesley, who was just, another person they were trying to figure out who has a thing. Like Jake doesn't really have a thing, like, like as we've talked about a million times, the TNG characters, you can kind of boil down to like a thing.
They are a theme. They are characters who are basically a theme that they inhabit. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, they play their part in each episode, because whatever their thing is factors into the story in a certain way. But in this, Jake is more of a real character because he doesn't really, he's a writer, but it's not like he doesn't solve any problems by being a writer, or he doesn't, it doesn't really, it's the framing device for the episode, but it doesn't really play a part in the episode as far as the action. And
which shows him how futile it is. Like what he is not good enough to stop what's happening. And even if he were to write about it, people wouldn't remember it down the line.
Yeah. So they've allowed Jake to become more of a real character than they ever did with Wesley.
He is more real. He is more, they have a little bit of like a fluidity that they can do things with him. And I think that he's been consistently portrayed as someone who's growing towards something, as you were saying. Like a lot of his episodes feature what he wants to be when he grows up, or like how he's unhappy now and what this means, and it has to do with change when Nog leaves and stuff like that. Like he loses his friend, he's lost his mother. Everything that has to do with Jake is about getting older. So he does have that guiding principle to it, and him learning things feels more natural in a way that, like, if you focus an episode like this on O'Brien, it would kind of feel like, well, O'Brien's like 45 years old. I feel he's a little bit late to be learning things like this.
Yeah.
So I think that's the one positive about having a show like this where you have a younger character. TNG never accomplished that with Wesley, but I think Jake does a pretty good job at it. And I think that as I get, one thing that's really changed on this watch of DS9 for me is that I'm watching it now as a parent, and the Sisko relationship is really actually pretty strong in a way that I didn't appreciate before. And I think that what Sisko talks about in this one is really interesting. Sisko and Odo have a scene together where they're talking about being parents and no longer being able to protect your kids. And I don't know, I thought it was really well done. It's really well written and everything like that, especially coming off the ICU visit where you feel completely helpless and you're like, well, Jesus, like someone has to help him if I can't. But I thought that was really well written. I think that the Siskos themselves are a pretty decent 90s representation of a father and son, especially in how they're sort of growing apart at this point. Jake is going his own path. Yeah,
definitely. I also really like that scene because at the beginning when Odo comes in, Sisko is like so into listening to whatever boring fucking story Odo has to tell him. He's like, and that's when I hurt my ribs. And he's like, oh my God. That's so cool. Like, he's so bored that he's just waiting for Odo to come in and just give him anything.
I was. He's like, everyone is so scared to come in and talk to me, but you, Odo, come in and he tells him that really boring story about jumping off the stairs and he hurt himself. But I was thinking that you've mentioned it before, and now it's all that I can notice. I think sometimes Avery Brooks tries to make dialogue that doesn't need to be interesting.
Oh yeah,
like he doesn't need to sell that line so hard. Like, he should just relax and be like, and then what happened? Like, it's kind of a decent story. Why don't you continue? But he leans forward, he like taps on the desk, and he's like, and then his eyes grow wide. He's like, and then what happened then? It's Avery Brooks overselling, and he didn't do that on the ship, which was what I thought is better for performance, even if he's fixing things at this point because he has great scenes now and then. But he does do that a little bit too much.
Yeah. I like that scene, but yeah, I think you're right. I think I was at first not totally sold on the stuff on DS9 because it was like, it felt such a drastic shift. Because I was thinking like, well, I mean, why? That you've got so much stuff that you can do back there. Why do you need to go all the way back to DS9? But yeah, I think
especially it opens with the sort of tertiary Retigino decaffeinated coffee with Kira.
Yeah,
scene.
that scene was pretty silly. Although I did like when Quark referred to the baby as the lessee in a
the
transaction
pregnancy.
or
He's
something
just
like
renting
that.
space.
Yeah, which I thought was really
space.
funny. Yeah, that scene was whatever. But once they got into the Sisko stuff, I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. I mean, I think the only thing that might have strengthened that, but it's probably going too far out of the way, is to have some sort of scene between the two of them before Jake leaves or something.
Yeah.
But you don't really need that because you've had 4 seasons of them with scenes together,
Yes. Yeah, because I think the entire story, if you want to consider that a B story, that entire story is told in that scene where Sisko's talking to Odo about what's going on. You get to see Sisko leave. That's the same scene that he leaves, but I don't think you ever check in with Ben Sisko after that until you see him at the very end.
Oh, really? Is that the only time they don't cut back? I can't remember.
I don't think so, because he would be on the Defiant, I think, and I don't remember them showing a Defiant scene, so I think that's it.
There's the scene though where he's like, is it the same scene where he's like, I have to go save him? Or there's another scene, right, where he decides that he needs to go fly the Defiant over there, right?
I think that's the end of the Odo scene, because Odo's that's Odo's sitting in the office after they leave. So I think that's when Sisko realizes that he gets to go at that point.
Okay.
The only other thing I think to really talk about is the what they're actually talking about in the episode, which is the how courage is sort of poorly defined, and based on what you think. I think the best part of this, it's not cliche, but it's very sort of stock and understandable what Jake goes through prior to this. Like, he goes in with hubris, he sees a bunch of blood, he starts to freak out. He goes outside and gets under attack where he runs into dying soldiers on the front line, and he's even more shell-shocked by it. He's embarrassed by the fact that he abandoned Bashir, and Bashir was able to be the courageous one who finished the job for him, and he's sort of embarrassed by the fact that he didn't have the courage to do it, and he knows that everyone around him is now judging him as not being able to do this in the future and still being a coward. What I really love, at the ending scene when the Klingons invade, Jake Sisko does not become action hero Jake Sisko and pick up a phaser and redeem himself. He basically just hides behind a desk and fires a phaser crazily, which ends up working out for him, and that's how it ends. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I as soon as I saw the phaser rifle on the ground, I was like, ugh, I know where this is gonna go, and they didn't do it. They had him just spray and pray basically, and win by accident, and he didn't. It wasn't even like he.
It wasn't a plan.
Yeah, and nobody came back to get him at the last minute. The place fell on top of him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he redeems himself story-wise there by not really becoming something that he's not. He stays consistent with himself. He luckily gets out of it just by sheer happenstance that the thing he does chooses to work. And I think they almost sell at the end that the other characters think he did something more brave than he actually did. Where I think it's unclear to the other characters that he was really just sort of accidentally ended up in this situation, and they're treating him as more heroic, which ties into his whole thesis of being heroic and being a coward are very difficult to define, and it's hard to see what's in the hearts of those actual people when they're doing things.
Yeah, and it's really interesting also that he doesn't come right out and say that he wasn't a hero. You know,
Yes.
he doesn't.
Yeah.
He kind of takes the praise, and he might not think that internally, but he doesn't come out and say it.
Right.
Unless he might say it to Sisko. I don't remember.
Well,
Although
yeah,
it's-
in his writing, Sisko has the line about it takes bravery to show people what's in your heart, or to write down what's in your heart and then show it to other people.
Yeah. So I guess he does say it eventually.
But he doesn't turn it down immediately when he's laying there in the cinders in the concrete. He's not about to tell Dr. Bashir he's not a hero.
Right.
Wait for the book.
You know, excuse me. A couple weeks ago, I got to see Peter Jackson's new documentary about World War One, and it was really worth. Unfortunately, I don't think it's playing in the theater anymore. But when it comes out on DVD, you should check it out. It's really amazing. And one of the things that really struck me is the only dialogue in it is all recordings they did with actual survivors of the war, and every single one of them who talked about it the same way, which was just like, yeah, you know, it was. Well, first of all, they talk about it in that weird, dry British way where they're talking about the worst thing to ever happen to the planet, as though it was just going to get milk at the store.
Yeah. Is this World War I or World War II?
World War One.
Okay.
And they're like, yeah, you know, it was awful, but you just had a job to do, and you went out and you did it, and you didn't really think about what it meant. And it like they all talk about how
stiff upper lip.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and I'm sure some of that is probably putting on a little bit of a front to hide the fact that they were scared shitless. But it's you know, I felt like Jake Sisko in this episode when I was watching that thing, going like, I don't know how these people are reacting this way. They're just doing what they have to do and just ignoring all the carnage around them, when I would just be like screaming in a corner somewhere.
Yeah, my grandparents lived through the Nazi bombings in World War II.
Oh man,
they were alive for that.
Did you ever talk to them about it?
They don't really. They have the same attitude you are. They were like, well, it was a pretty bad week we had, and it's like they don't treat it like it's a historical event that you would think of. It was more just like, yeah, that was that thing that happened, and it's a jolly good thing that we came out on the other side okay. But it's a very funny British tendency to do that.
Yeah. The other thing that struck me in this episode when I was thinking about it compared to that documentary is the astronomical loss of life in the First World War that a lot of times kind of gets forgotten about. And that was general for the entire war. But based on this episode, one of the lines that really struck me was at the end when Jake was talking about how all of these people died, all of this stuff happened, and no one's going to remember this in like a year.
Yes.
Like this is not even like a major battle.
Not a major battle.
Minor
it's just
skirmish, and no one's going to talk about this ever. And it was that kind of I don't know, fickleness or flippancy when it comes to this kind of stuff is really fascinating. Like and not to turn this into a talk about the documentary, but one of the things that they talked about that struck me there was when all these soldiers came home, nobody talked about it. Like it wasn't like they all came home and it was this big parade and everybody was like, oh, thank you for what you did. It was just like, you know, you were gone for 2 years and now you're back, and nobody really talked about why you were gone or what you had done. And it was just, they tried to forget about it as quickly as possible, which is, it's amazing when you think about what's actually happening.
I mean, that's sort of, that attitude is going to be written into Jake in a way.
Yeah.
Jake will become the sort of Vietnamization. You know, like people say that Vietnam was the first war we lost because it was the first one that people could actually see what was going on over there.
Right.
As opposed to just sort of like blank news stories or like very delayed things from World War II where the news doesn't come over for a while. Like there were actually embedded reporters in Vietnam, and reporting on the war that way, as Jake is going to, and he kind of does here, changes the attitude and the perception of the warfare so that you're able to sort of write about it a little bit more, you know, you could say romantically or whatever. You could write about it more on a human level than the sort of raw data dump numbers level of who's winning where. But I think that I think that's Jake's ultimate purpose and fate, is to become that kind of a character. Whether or not you think that works in the 24th century, it doesn't really matter, because DS9 is kind of given up on the fact that they exist in the 24th century, and they're really embracing more just classic storytelling tropes and building the show off of those things. This being just a very sort of standard war story, I suppose you could say at this point.
Yeah, as they've started doing this, God, excuse me. I've started thinking about how them expanding their environment, like I always talk about, is actually starting to poke holes in the Star Trek concept a little bit. And I think some of the ways it's doing that is that traditionally everything was seen through the eyes of the Enterprise, right? Which is a military, for lack of a better term, a military vessel, right? And so what you're seeing is more or less an accounting of the military actions of whatever their mission was. And as you bring more people into it and bring more civilization into it and widen your net, you start to think about things like, well, we're on Deep Space Nine now. We're not on the Enterprise. This is not necessarily a military operation anymore. This is a community of people. But there's no news. There's no outside information. Like the on the older shows, we get the information because the Enterprise is getting the information because they're privy to whatever Federation is getting. The Federation is getting.
They get as much information as you need to follow along. Yeah.
But like now that you're on Deep Space Nine, there's nothing to imply that people are finding out anything about this war that's going on, or anything regarding the circumstances of it. The only time we've seen anything like it really is when they have that Gowron thing where they're like, "Oh, Gowron's a changeling." That's the only time people are watching the news. Basically, it's not, it's not even the news. It's like this one specific thing. It makes you think about these external elements that play so heavily into stories about wars and multiple conflicts involving countries and stuff. Like, if this was going on realistically, where's all the Klingon propaganda that would be coming out? Or there's none of that at all, and there's no touching on that, and it kind of it's bringing up interesting questions as far as what bringing that stuff in would do to the worldview of Star Trek.
Yeah, we talked about it. Obviously, a lot of it's budgetary because we talked about it in Homefront, where apparently Earth is on lockdown and we see 2 security guards throughout the whole show. Yes. Like there's no real sense that any of this is happening. You just kind of have to take it for what it is. But yeah, when they do things like, how does the news work? You hear a lot of, I will say DS9 does tend to act as if the characters gossip quite a bit about what's going on. Like it's sort of hearsay, the news that they pass between each other. But they don't have an official CNN of the future or Fox News of the future or anything like that they're tuning into, fortunately.
I guess you could kind of, if you really wanted to, I guess you could take away that maybe that kind of stuff has become more personalized as far as the way people view it. So if you extrapolate out what we have now, you're not seeing phones and stuff like that, but they do have tablets and screens and stuff like that. So you could extrapolate out, maybe they're getting all their info through those things, and we just don't see that.
Yes, that's what I'd have to assume.
Yeah, but it's interesting that they've yet to touch on stuff like that. And usually when they do, it's with some sort of subspecies or something, where they go to some place that hasn't achieved warp yet, and they're like, well, these people love the newspaper, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they just invented the printing press, and it has a warp drive attached to it, so let's talk to them.
Have they ever done that? Have they ever gone to a civilization who achieved warp by accident?
They should have. I think there is some stuff about I believe it's sort of canon that the Klingons didn't invent warp drive, they just stole it from a species that they conquered. Yeah, that's so it's stuff like that, which they should get into. I don't think they ever do on the show, but that's a book canon if you want to consider it canon or something like that. Okay, so we're going to call it a day there. We're going to take a break, play an audio clip. Me and Clay are going to come back, read some patron thoughts, give our final thoughts about Nor the Battle to the Strong.
But I have to do something. I've got to try.
Forget it.
But I have to. That way this will all make sense. Maybe I ran for a reason. So I could find you and save your life.
Ran.
From the explosions. We had to get to the runabout for the generator, and the shelling started, and I couldn't see Dr. Bashir. The explosions, they kept getting closer. I had to get out of there. So I ran. I ran and I kept running until I found you.
The doctor. You left him.
It was a mistake.
That's what you call it.
I didn't mean for it to happen.
And now you think bringing me back is gonna make everything all right. Sorry, kid. Life doesn't work like that.
All right. So as always, if you support the show on patreon.com/the Pensky File, which is much appreciated, you can leave your thoughts about upcoming episodes. According to the poll, people like this, so this will be something that continues. But here's Holly McLaughlin. She says, "Nor the Battle to the Strong. If my memory of Bible class as a kid is accurate, this title comes from a verse about time and chance happening to everyone. Jake's maturity in telling the truth is a nice character moment for him, and having to accept that he can't always protect his son is a nice character moment for Benjamin." I will actually read the entire quote that this is from. It comes from Ecclesiastes. I don't know my Bible books. Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, verse 11. "I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all." That's what the title is from.
I call bullshit on this title. I think I said this previously when you mentioned it the first time. I hate it when it's so pretentious to pick like the middle sentence of a 4-sentence quote and like dot. I don't know. It just feels cheap to me. If you're going to do it, go all the way and do it like they used to do and just take the entire stanza of a Shakespeare poem. And that's the title of your Star Trek episode.
I kind of like it. I just like really dramatic titles, I think, in Star Trek. So they'll start doing this a little bit more. But yeah, they do cherry pick the center component of the whole quote out here. Stephen Cobb says, "Can't get past the voiceover. Way weaker than a captain's log as a story tool." I agree. Christian Pouch says, "This episode is supposed to be a really gritty look at the savageness of war on the front lines. But there are a couple of things that don't fully work for me. One, I feel like some of the performances are too blunt, like they're trying too hard. I could be the only one who thought that. But I also think it's difficult to take such a land engagement seriously when Star Trek ground combat is so primitive. No body armor, no crude weapons, and we never actually see any vehicles. Why aren't they bombarded? Is there a shield? I'm a little meh on this one, but if you can convince me otherwise, maybe you can."
You're thinking with your brain, not with your heart, man.
Yeah, this is an episode that takes place in your heart, not on the actual battle lines.
I would like to say, go back a second and mention the voiceover thing.
Sure.
If Sirach Lofton was a better actor, I actually would have liked to have seen a spin-off from this that was basically just Jake Sisko out in the galaxy. I think that would have been interesting. Like as him, maybe
like post-series.
Yeah. So he's out there, like basically the voiceover becomes his captain's log as he's like journaling his adventures or something. I think that would have been kind of interesting.
Yeah. That's the next Discovery spinoff. You just pitched it and landed a job writing that one. I think, Clay. They're giving them out to everybody. So
hey, I'll take it.
Zam Nuclear Wessel says, but for Christian's point, I don't disagree about the acting. I don't really care about the battle scenes because I think that the hinting at what the Klingons are doing is more effective than actually seeing them in a lot of cases. So I don't mind it doing that way. Zam Nuclear Wessel says, "This is basically DS9 MASH, but I like it as a one-time change of pace. The guest characters are more of an ensemble than you usually get, and I especially like the guy dying in the foxhole. The speeches are a little actory, but part of the story is about how everyone is there performing and putting on a front. I really like the glimpse of Bashir on the hospital bed, imagining what he's going to tell the captain. I like the point about putting on a front. I think that's effective. I wish I could buy into it enough to really elevate the episode a little bit more, but I can't.
I wish the guy in the foxhole or the shell hole or whatever had been less of a, like, just a generic tough guy.
Yes. You don't let my guts fall over your shoes.
Sit me up so I can look at the sky when I die. I'm not going to look at the dirt. Don't let me look at the dirt.
That might be the roughest stretch of action for someone in a Star Trek thing. Jake Sisko falls over a dead Klingon, runs and falls down a hill, and the guy hits him with like the butt of his gun when he lands on the ground.
Drink the water, pussy. I don't need it. I'm dying. Like a soldier.
That character is a little bit too generic of the tough guy soldier. The worst part to me was the ending where Jake Sisko's like, I left the doctor and I ran away. He's like, you left the fucking doctor? He's like, it's like, you fucking pussy. I'm going to die now. And then he just dies. Like, there's he's such a hard soldier character that he is more interested in interacting with this coward he sees before him than being like, Jesus Christ, like, I don't want to die out here all by myself. It's a little goofy.
I wish it had been Tim Roth from Reservoir Dogs. I'm fucking dying.
We need more blood. There's a lot of blood coming out of Tim Roth in that entire movie.
Is this the most violent episode of Star Trek ever?
So far, as you're going to find, they will start.
I'm sorry, before they start cutting up bodies in fucking Discovery.
That the Klingons there are the most violent, but you're going to find actually that the show will start repeating themes that they've done and redoing them a little bit better in the next couple seasons.
Yeah.
The ship episode which was the second episode of this season. There's an episode the second season of next season called Rocks and Shoals, which is almost identical, but it's different, but it's almost the same setup. And it's interesting that they repeat it like that. Let's see here. Kyle Barrett says, "No, the battle to the strong is just me, or was it strange to hear Dax say Thursday in such a sci-fi world where they have 26-hour..."
Yeah, I also thought that was kind of weird. Have they ever mentioned days ever in the show?
I've never heard days of the week mentioned before, and it doesn't make any sense in context because who knows if they're operating on a 24-hour day at that point. They have 26-hour days and star dates. It sounds odd to hear someone say the normalcy of Thursday. They rarely say days of the week, opting instead for in 5 days or in a couple of weeks. But Thursday? Nah, that's not right. Not right at all. Other than that, I enjoy the episode a fair amount. Sure, some of the acting is a little ropey and Jake gets a little too close to Wesley Crusher for my liking in a few scenes, but we've never had a Star Trek episode like it. The series had never had wars the focus quite like this, and while it's not as much to today's standards, they do push the injuries and blood quite far. It's a good look at the cost of war through the most innocent eyes on the station. Although, maybe not that innocent, I guess. Hashtag Jake Sisko, fuck machine.
Mm-hmm. That's why I thought that one older female nurse, I was like, yeah, that's it. That's going to be it. That's the one.
It's on like Donkey Kong. Matthew Ross says, I enjoyed the ideas in this one, but felt there could have been more. The story is interesting in that you get a sort of non-Starfleet view of what happens. The mash of triage surgery scene where it's supposed to be played harsh or tension-filled comes across as too casual. The main thing I cannot erase from my head is the scene where Bashir and Jake are running. What the hell was that? They did great running, Matthew Ross. Did they learn that from...
I will say, I was watching this with my girlfriend, and every time they cut to Jake running, she goes, he's so gangly. Which I can't disagree with.
Matthew Rouse says, did they learn that from the Ministry of Gangly Running?
Mm-hmm.
The character, he's actually, he's like a nephew of Kenny Lofton, the baseball player, actually.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he does have a little bit of raw athleticism running through the family.
That's what that is.
We've all been 16 arms and legs, 20 miles long, running this way and that. The characterization of all the characters, though, seem to be played in the extreme. The coward PTSD soldier, the hero, the all-knowing orderly, that detracts from the idea it's trying to convey. The extras laying around on the open plain seem quite scant for a massive battle, and all Jake needs to say is that he was there to write for Stars and Stripes. The two security guards have rifles in the end scenes. Why they weren't being rushed by hand, but by two Klingons, and they couldn't do anything, really. If those Klingons moved any slower, they would have had their hands on their hips and cackled maniacally. One thing's for certain, with the destruction of the Farragut, which is supposedly not a light nothing ship, and the way that the Klingons run all over these colonies, you really have to start to wonder how prepared the Federation is for a determined enemy. It's a good point. One criticism I've seen, Clay, I don't know, you didn't mention it, so you probably don't think. I don't think it is. It feels a little bit episode-y to have a peace treaty sort of rekindled or ceasefire between the Klingons, and then it just starts and stops for the action of this episode.
Yeah, I thought that was weird.
Okay.
I don't know why they just didn't set this. Well, I mean, maybe it's just production, but like it would have made more sense just to do this like 2 episodes ago or something.
Yes. Yeah.
Before whatever they did the peace treaty thing.
Yes. To do that last season. I mean, it feels like one of those things, or you could just do it away in that the. Maybe one thing Discovery is harping on is that you could write the Klingons as sort of a lot of them, they don't really act as a unified front. Maybe you could write them that way. Like there are going to be sort of rebel factions of Klingons that go out and look for battle, even though there is a ceasefire going on.
Sure.
I could see something like that, but it doesn't really bother me. It's just kind of an odd little episode.
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, it happened, what was it? Was it the Battle of New Orleans? That was like 2 weeks after the end of the Civil War or something like that?
Yep.
Or in,
the Revolutionary, right? Was that, or was it Battle of...
I think it was...
Maybe it might have been Civil War.
No, it wasn't. Maybe it was like War of 1812. I think Andrew Jackson was involved. I can't remember which war it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's that story of the the Japanese soldier who was fighting the Second World War until 1975. Have you heard about that?
No, is he just stuck on an island?
Yeah,
somewhere?
He was like marooned on an island, and nobody told him that the war was over, and if they did, he didn't believe them. So he basically was just fighting the war himself for 30 years until they actually found his commanding officer, who was like working in a library or something. And they brought his commanding officer and was over, and he was like, dude, the war's been over for 30 years. You got to chill out and come back home.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, war does crazy things to crazy people. It seems like not to sort of shit on World War II and the trauma that inflicted, but yeah, there's that Unbroken movie, the guy who like crashed a plane in World War II and floated around on a boat for 3 years or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we completely ruined Japan, or I don't know if we should say. I mean, yeah, essentially, if we didn't ruin it, we fucked them up pretty good. Like I don't think that that really is understood enough anymore about exactly like how we kind of broke Japan's collective mind.
Well, the West, because we fixed them up. They're better than ever now. They're like Germany and Japan are like two of the great success stories of it's like it was a time when like nation building was actually possible and you could like sort of improve a situation from what they were.
But you know what I mean.
No, I know. But the what is it? It's called the Western Curtain. What is that theater? The Western Theater,
Front.
right? Yeah. We don't talk about that as much in our like history classes, but the Pacific War is probably much weirder than the European side.
Yeah, that was technically the Eastern Front, I think.
Oh, I'm getting them mixed up just because of the globe type thing. But yeah, it's like that book about the guy was just like plane technology wasn't great back then, and you were flying from these little tiny island chains one to another, and it's like the planes were just crashing all over the place, and it's just like what a terrible, awful place to have to fight a war in with technology that's not particularly good.
Oh God, yeah. That, not to go back to World War I, but I find it endlessly fascinating because it was the most violent war ever in the history of the world, and people seem to have forgotten completely about it.
Yes.
But if you look at the technology change in the 4 years that it was going on, they went from fighting on cavalry on horseback to tanks.
Yeah.
And like
digging
the entire
holes and machine gunning each other. Yeah.
Yeah. The entire war was basically just, they jumped. There had been like no major advancement in military technology in like 150 years before then. And then they leapt forward like 2 centuries in the course of 4 years. It's crazy.
Yeah. They still ended up not going anywhere. World War I is funny because for how long they fought, no one really gained anything.
Yeah,
like the people
that's what
just
makes
stuck.
it that much crazier. Is that it was, they like I think in England alone, like 1 million people died over the course of 4 years, and they for really nothing.
Yeah,
it's fucking insane.
Yeah, it's just you have to really believe in a cause, I guess. Anyway, we'll wrap this up. So, what are you going to give this one on a scale of 1 to 5? I had a very hard time rating this one, so I'm going to see what you say. I think I know what you're going to say.
I'm going to say 4.
Okay.
Is that what you thought I was going to say?
Yeah, and I think this. I guess I'll say a 4, but it's like a really weak 4 to me. Something just feels off. Something felt off for the ship for you, and you couldn't quite put your finger on it. I kind of feel that way about this one. I more appreciate this one. This one's like a Primus episode to me. I more appreciate this than I want to watch or listen to it. And
I don't really listen to their music, but I appreciate that they're making it.
Right. It's a good on you for going out there and getting your own MP3 ID named Primus as opposed to any other thing. But like, yeah, it's just, I really like what they did with Jake. I think that the story is pretty good. The guest acting really kills me in a lot of ways. And I don't know. I don't really have major problems with it, but it just doesn't grab me. I think something is just viscerally disconnected from it, which is odd because it's such a visceral episode.
Yeah, that's fair.
Let's see here. So that's it. We're both going to give it a 4. I'll give it a sort of a hesitant 4, but it goes in a 4 nonetheless. Nor the battle to the strong. Thank you guys very much for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. You can go to Facebook, Twitter, Discord, all those things. Patreon.com/The Pensky File if you want to support the show. And remember, there's a poll up there for all the patrons who currently listen. It'd be great if you could go there and let me know what you think about the Patreon. Otherwise, you can rate the show on iTunes, all that stuff. Check out, I'll be putting up a couple of YouTube videos. They'll probably be up by the time this comes up as a year-end wrap-up. You can check those out if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Clay, do you have anything that you want to say?
Night Moves. In stores now, if you like comic books. Also, I think Poser number 4, the final issue of Poser, comes out January, I think. Are we in January technically? Yeah, I think we're in January at this point. Yeah, it should be out pretty soon. And we got the Bat Ass podcast. If you want to listen to me and Sean talk about Batman the Animated Series, you can do that. We put out our Christmas special covering Mask of the Phantasm. And I'm also looking forward to the results from that poll, because if it's anything like last year's results from the poll, they should be pretty interesting.
Oh, this is more,
a different poll?
Well, this is for Patreon as opposed to the podcast in general. Yeah.
Okay, so the answers will be more reasonable, probably.
Probably.
Can I say my favorite answer from last year? I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I don't know who wrote
but people will have forgotten what they wrote last year too. So
my favorite thing that we got in a poll.
It was a poll to say what could be improved about the show, just sort of like on a technical level, like what you would like prefer the episodes do, what we're doing wrong, what you think is good. So go ahead.
And the question was, what would you improve? And the person wrote, more Patreon content. All right, cool. Then a couple questions later was, are you a subscriber to the Patreon? And if not, what would make you subscribe to be part of the Patreon? And the person wrote, I am not, and I would not ever subscribe. So they would prefer we do more Patreon content, but have no intention of listening to it or paying for it, at least. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's one of the, I'll be talking about more of this with the Patreon, but the Patreon is funny because the Patreon is really the only reason that the show exists. So how do you say this? Like if you don't want to support on Patreon, that's fine, but it's weird to sort of shit on the Patreon at that point because the other people are funding what you're listening to.
Right.
Like realize that when you're saying these things. Like I can understand you don't have the money, you don't have the means, you don't particularly want to support the show. It's totally fine. Other people are, and you're getting the benefit of it. So I'm not saying you have to donate or anything like that, but just like be aware when you're writing these comments that are like, I would never subscribe to the Patreon. I don't believe in any of this stuff. It's like, well, all right. Like you're getting stuff for free on the kindness of strangers, basically.
But then also, why would you care if we do more Patreon content?
We do more of it too. Yeah. It's just
unless they're stealing it somehow.
It could be. Yeah. It's probably Greg.
Fucking Greg.
That's it. But yeah, I'd appreciate it if you guys fill out the Patreon poll. That's about it. We're going to wrap it up there. Check out Clay's new books, which are out. You can get them online. You can get them at your local comic shop. I think we're done. We're going to talk about Bandersnatch now, which will probably be out before this, so this won't make a lot of sense. But have a good one, guys, and we will see you next time.